Yes, I was just thinking about an undiagnosed autistic colleague in my last job who approached me when the office reopened after the pandemic lockdowns to say, I think I might be autistic as well, because I never realised until I was working from home in the lockdown and then went back to the office, quite what an overwhelming sensory environment that is for me, with all the shiny desks and gleaming white walls and big windows. So sometimes you don't know what your needs are until they're met, and then you think, wow, this has been really helpful. And one of the issues for me, I talk about this a lot, that most people that are neurodivergent do not know. So when you hear statistics like 1 to 2% of people are autistic, take that with a massive pinch of salt. When you hear that only 14% of autistic people are employed, again, don't believe a word of that. We're everywhere and walking through life and in the workplace, struggling with getting easily overwhelmed, struggling with sensory issues and social interactions and things like that, and just not understanding why we struggle with things that our intellectual peers might take for granted. And me, I was 42. So I grew up with a brother who's autistic and ADHD with learning disabilities. So that was my frame of reference for autism. I knew that I couldn't get on at university, and I really fell off the rails and ended up dropping out at the end of the first year. Took me a while to find a job that suited me, and I was really lucky. I got into HR systems, which is really interesting, but also quite analytical, and it really suited me. And I stayed in that field for 20 years. But what I didn't know is that there were solid reasons why I was hitting barriers to progression, getting pulled up about things like meeting behaviours and getting frequently overwhelmed and, as Gina said, burned out. So when at the age of 42, my oldest child got diagnosed autistic, and he was referred for anxiety, but when he was assessed by an adolescent psychiatrist, she picked up that the underlying cause was autism. And he talked about anxiety attacks, as he called them. And when he described them, she said, he's talking about something much more extreme here. It's not an anxiety attack. It's a major brain event, an autistic meltdown. And the more she talked, the more the pennies dropped, and I realized that I was the same. So at 42, I got diagnosed. And that is when I started to recognize my needs and to be able to self-advocate and forgive myself for the things that I'm not so good at. It unlocks the key to compassion and understanding. And it's only when we can be open about our needs and advocate for ourselves that we can have those needs met. If we don't do that, then we're always going to struggle or move on, drop out of the workforce. But until we feel psychological safety, we're never going to do that. So this is such an important session for anyone that's in that position where they've got needs that aren't being met.
So is that one of the benefits of a diagnosis? It sort of gives you permission to ask for support.
Yes. Well, for me, it sparked quite a lot of introspection. So I had a really good think about what was going on leading up to burnout, leading up to, as at the time it was diagnosed clinical depression. And I treated it with the usual things, SSRIs, a month off work, country walks, self-care, that kind of thing, and then bounced back stronger. But when this happens again and again, and even therapy to tackle some demons from childhood and things like that, and when it keeps coming back, you realise that it isn't that, and it's something else. And I see this happening so much, but what I was able to do then is think, well, where is it coming from? And quite often, there was something in common with these experiences. So I had my day job, which doesn't go away because people always need support with HR systems, and there's always MI that needs to be produced, pay review projects that need to be implemented, etc. But on top of that, there would be like big one-off projects, like a system implementation, that kind of thing. So when that happens, you end up in a lot of project team meetings. So I was constantly watching my meeting behaviors, putting on professional veneers, masking furiously. And I didn't have the amount of downtime with my head in a spreadsheet, which I'm usually used to having. So I just realized that it's conflicting demands, and being in a lot of meetings, taking verbal instructions, and while struggling to keep on top of my day job. And it's just, it all keeps adding up until I'm cracking up and I need to just have a massive break from work. Since realizing I was autistic and that's what was happening, I've been able to self-advocate more and avoid those conflicts of interest. And therefore I haven't suffered from burnout.
So you've been able to take more control in regulating your environment.
Yeah. And I've always been a people pleaser, and that's another autistic thing. I think we've gone through trauma, maybe bullying. So we want people to like us. We want to impress. So it can be quite difficult to say, no, I can't take that on as well because I'm already at my limit. So that was a discipline I had to learn. And I'd have never been able to do that if I didn't feel safe to say, no, that is pushing me over the edge.
And can you identify what it was that created that safety for you? Because this is back to what we were talking about at the beginning, isn't it?
Yeah.
Psychological safety is the bedrock.
So I've had different experiences in my last employer and the one before, but in the one where I was when I realized I was autistic, I felt in a privileged position because I worked in HR. So I knew the policies, I knew what kind of reasonable adjustments get accepted. I knew that it was an organisation that did not routinely discriminate against people with disabilities, including invisible disabilities and neurological conditions. So I felt safe to talk to my teammates, really, the HR consultants there, about my needs. And they were able to share, without saying any names, they were able to share, oh yes, we supported this person who's autistic for many years. And these are the kinds of adjustments that have been put into place. But I also, because I'm a little bit older, I felt like I could be open, and that if people didn't like me or they didn't like it and they mocked me, that I was just old enough and comfortable enough that it wouldn't bother me. So my psychological safety came from a place of privilege, whereas in my last job, I felt safe to advocate for my needs because it was a mental health charity. And I knew that although they didn't have much inclusion strategies and policies in place, I knew that they really meant it. So they really wanted people to be okay and to thrive at work and to be well in themselves and well in their head. So without any, there were no networks or anything like that really, or there was one, but it only had 3 members, that kind of thing. No reasonable adjustments policy and form, but I knew that they were people that genuinely cared. So I was able to be open.